Hello, I'm Susan McPeters, Public Affairs Director here at WQPT. Election Day, November 7th, is fast approaching. In the Iowa Quad Cities, one race which is being very closely watched is that for the 1st District congressional seat held by Jim Nussle since 1991. Rather than seek re-election, Nussle, a Republican, is running for Iowa governor against Democratic Secretary of State Chet Culver. Now, 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats announced their plans to seek the House seat that Nussle is vacating in January of 2007. That number was eventually reduced to Democrat Bruce Braley and Republican Mike Whalen. 2 other candidates whose names were placed on the ballot by petition are also running in that congressional race. To help voters make an informed choice, WQPT and the Quad City Times newspaper joined forces to bring you the following debate between Bruce Braley and Mike Whalen. The debate was taped on Tuesday, October 3rd, and is moderated by Mark Rodolfi of the Quad City Times. We thank the Times for making this joint venture possible, and we thank you for watching.
Good evening and welcome to this debate of Iowa's 1st congressional district candidates. My name is Mark Rodolfi. I'm editorial page editor for the Quad City Times, and I'm proud to present this debate on behalf of WQP-TV, Blackhawk College, and the Quad City Times. Welcome to Davenport's Niswander Theater. Tonight, Quad City Times and WQP-T are presenting 2 of the candidates who want to be Iowa's next 1st District Congressman. We have Democrat Bruce Braley and Republican Mike Whalen. Each won their party's nomination to run in this election. Also on the ballot are James Hill of Eldridge and Albert Showman of Waterloo, who were nominated by petition. For tonight's debate, we will present the candidates with a series of questions, including questions submitted by readers of the Quad City Times. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to reply, and we will also provide 30-second rebuttal for candidates who so wish to. Later in the debate, we'll allow the candidates to ask each other a question. Democracy relies on leadership and participation. I want to thank the candidates for their leadership, stepping up to these public roles, and for the participation of our viewers for tuning into this broadcast. Let's begin. We'll start with opening statements from the candidates. A coin toss earlier today determined that Mr. Braley would begin. Mr. Braley?
Thanks, Mark. And thanks to the Quad City Times, WQPT, Blackhawk College, and all of you who came out tonight to hear this very important discussion. Elections are about choices, and in 35 days, the voters in Iowa's 1st District have a choice to make. They're going to decide which one of us represents the values of this district and is going to work hardest to make sure that a voice is heard in Washington on behalf of the people who live in Iowa's 12 counties that make up the 1st District. I think that as you listen to where we stand on these important issues, you're going to get a sense of where we're coming from and what we're going to do when we go to Washington. My great-great-grandparents, James and Nancy Donnan, came to this area during the potato famine in Ireland looking for a better way of life for themselves and their families. Both of my parents grew up on Iowa farms during the Depression, and they taught me the values of sacrifice and hard work. I grew up in the small town of Brooklyn, Iowa, and I started working in 3rd grade. I've delivered newspapers, mowed yards, sold Christmas cards, baled hay, worked on farms, driven a dump truck, done janitorial work, built roads and bridges, and waited on tables to put myself through college at Iowa State and through law school at the University of Iowa. I fell in love with a beautiful, intelligent woman from Dubuque and got married 23 years ago. And she makes me a better person. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you if it were not for her. And she's here sitting in the 2nd row with her sister and my mother, and I'm proud to have her here. I have 3 reasons that I'm running for Congress. Their names are Lisa, David, and Paul. They give me the motivation to go out and work hard to make a better way for them and their future. Elections are about choices. You need to decide whether you want to change the course of this country or let things stay the same. And if you choose the 1st, vote for Bruce Braley.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. Mr. Whalen.
Well, when I came back here in 1978, I opened a little 100-seat restaurant called the Iowa Machine Shed. And you know, opening a restaurant's a humbling experience. You get to do just about every job in a little restaurant. Wash dishes, clean the bathrooms, pour coffee, not in that order. But you get to do it all. And you know, the neat thing about talking at the I.O. Machine Shed was that I talked to people in three-piece suits and in bib overalls. And you have to listen. And during that time, I listened quite a bit about what the fears and the hopes of Iowans. Just as we were starting to get going in the early 80s, the first round of the global fight for jobs hit Iowa. Remember what it did here in the Quad Cities? 26,000 jobs we lost in just about a year and a half. Back then, there was a choice between, do we want more government, higher taxes, more regulation, and more litigation? Or another fella in a group of people came along and said lower taxes, less litigation, less regulation, and America will bounce back. Well, luckily, we chose the second path. And we had a great run here in the last 20 years as we've seen the First District rebuild the Quad Cities, Clinton, Dubuque, Waterloo, Cedar Falls. We need to make that choice again. Do we want to win the two global fights in the 21st century? The global fight for jobs and the global fight against terrorism. We do have two different views on these things, because I think that the lower taxes, less litigation, and less regulation, and winning the fight against the global fight against terrorism are two fights that we have to win for our kids and our grandkids. You know, it is interesting, though, Bruce. My great-grandfather came here because of the potato famine, and I also married a girl from Dubuque, Kim. So I guess we do have a lot in common. But I will say this. You know, one thing I will have to tell you, and one thing you're going to hear a lot about tonight is Mr. Bush. You know, when Mr. Braley had an opponent in the primary, he had two opponents. And when he disagreed with them, he put their face up on an ad with Mr. Bush. Now he's doing that with me. I'd like to tell you my positive agenda tonight instead of just what's wrong with the other person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. For our first question, it comes from reader Diane McAnally of Bettendorf. Diane is a neighbor of Mr. Whalen and recalls teaching Sunday school with Mrs. Braley a few years back. Diane has a son in the Navy preparing for deployment to the Persian Gulf, and her question is about Iraq. The question is this: how do each of you think our nation should proceed in Iraq? And specifically, Mrs. McNally would like to know, how would you use the funding power of Congress to implement your agenda? This question goes first to Mr. Whalen.